You don't stand on a street corner in a gated neighborhood. You don't sit in a parked car at the end of someone's driveway. You don't linger. You don't loiter. You don't exist. Not in a place like this where everyone knows every car that belongs and every face that doesn't. So let me ask you a different question. How do you watch an 84-year-old woman, her house, her gait, her schedule, her routines, for 3 weeks without a single neighbor reporting something wrong? How does someone spend enough time in that neighborhood to learn which camera position to block, which foliage to grab off the ground, which 25-minute window to exploit, and walk in and out of there repeatedly without a single camera catching them coming or going? You don't do that from the outside. You do it from a house down the street. The Catalina Foothills area of Tucson is not a neighborhood where you blend in easily. These are single-story desert homes on generous lots, separated by low desert walls, and native landscaping set back from quiet streets that don't carry through traffic. The houses that line the area where Nancy Guthrie lived aren't stacked on top of each other. Neighbors know each other's vehicles. They know who belongs. In communities like this, surveillance cameras aren't just on the front door. They're on gates, on driveways, on garage corners, mounted on trees looking out to the street. This is the kind of neighborhood where if you park on the street and sit there for 20 minutes, at least one person notices. And yet, whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie required someone to have detailed, specific operational knowledge of this exact property, her camera position, her schedule, her gait, her routines. Former retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dabb told Parade magazine that the logistics of what happened to Nancy Guthrie are, in his professional assessment, too complex for one person to have managed alone. He believes, based on the facts as publicly known, that this operation may have involved between 2 and 4 people coordinating across multiple functions. 2 to 4 people coordinating around a specific target. In a neighborhood they clearly knew well enough to operate inside. That does not happen by accident, and it does not happen in 3 hours. Someone spent time here. Someone studied this neighborhood, its rhythms, its gaps, its patterns, before February 1st ever arrived. The FBI has known this from the beginning, and right now their activity inside that neighborhood tells us they are circling back to the question they never stopped asking. Where did he go when he wasn't standing at Nancy's front door? The staging location framework. Bob Krigier spent nearly 3 decades with Pima County law enforcement. He commanded SWAT operations, the kind of work that requires you to think like the person you're pursuing, to model their decisions, to understand how operational planning actually happens at ground level. When Parade magazine sat down with him exclusively to ask about the FBI's focus on a recently vacated property near Nancy's home, Krigier didn't mince words. He said investigators could look at a property like that, a vacant home sitting quiet, recently emptied out, as a possible home base or staging location for the suspect or suspects. A cover story. Think about what that means for a moment, because this is important. A vacant house doesn't just provide shelter, it provides legitimacy. In a neighborhood like Catalina Foothills, where a strange face or an idling car would draw attention within minutes, a house provides something infinitely more valuable than physical cover. It provides reason. You're not a stranger lurking. You're a tenant. You're a buyer doing a walkthrough. You're someone between moves. You're someone who belongs there. Krigier told Parade that a location like that, out of the prying eye of the neighborhood, could also serve as a place to set up surveillance equipment. Equipment, he said, that could be easily stashed in a structure or on the property without anyone knowing. Sit with that for a second. Not standing at a window with binoculars, not craning from a car seat, but actual surveillance equipment, cameras or devices positioned to capture footage of the target neighborhood, potentially running on a schedule, building a picture of Nancy's comings and goings over days and weeks. And here's the operational picture Krigier outlined. Someone staying in that vacant home could move freely through the area at any hour without triggering suspicion. Morning, noon, and night. If you live there, or at least appear to live there, your presence in the neighborhood is explainable. You wave to the neighbor walking the dog. You nod at the landscaping crew. You pull into the driveway. You watch. You observe the activity of the neighborhood, the comings and goings of people, the timing of things, including Nancy. The FBI's focus on this vacant property didn't come out of nowhere. News Nation's Brian Enton, who has been embedded in this neighborhood reporting since day one, confirmed through sources that federal agents returned to Catalina Foothills in mid-March, going back to neighbors, asking more questions, and specifically asking about a neighbor who moved out before Nancy disappeared. Not a week after, not a month before, shortly before February 1st, Enton reported.
First, a couple of new developments today that I've learned about. I have confirmed through sources that the FBI has been back in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood over the last 24 hours or so, going back to neighbors' houses and asking more questions. Some of the things that I know that they're talking about is there's one neighbor that moved out before Nancy disappeared, and they have been asking more questions about that situation. Not to say that that has anything to do with what happened, but that is something that the FBI agents are asking about.
The FBI has been back in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, and there's one neighbor that moved out before Nancy disappeared, and they are asking more questions about that situation. That's a reporter choosing his words carefully, and it's worth paying attention to what he's not saying as much as what he is. The FBI doesn't go back to a neighborhood 6 weeks into an investigation to ask follow-up questions about a former neighbor unless that neighbor's timeline is relevant to the timeline they're building. You don't ask about someone who moved out if the when of their departure doesn't connect to something you already know. They left. Someone left shortly before February 1st. The FBI is asking why. The vacant property and additional cameras. Beyond the vacant property itself, investigators have been quietly building a secondary picture, and it's one that wasn't visible to the public until Enton's reporting this week. The FBI walked a construction site in the neighborhood multiple times. At the corner of Camino Escalante and Camino Miraval, a house under construction near Nancy's home, federal investigators interviewed workers, checked on-site sheds, and walked the property. This matters because of what a construction site represents operationally. A house under active construction is a location that has regular, legitimate foot traffic. Contractors, laborers, delivery drivers, inspectors, faces that cycle in and out on a schedule that any attentive observer could learn. It's also a location with sight lines, with materials and structures that provide cover, with access to adjacent properties that would otherwise be fenced or gated. The FBI also recovered additional security camera images from Nancy's own property, images beyond the now famous doorbell footage. According to ABC News, cameras covering the pool, backyard, and side yard of Nancy's home captured thumbnail images of unidentified individuals in the days before her disappearance. Thumbnail images only. No video footage from those cameras survived. But former FBI agent Brad Garrett told Enton's team that these earlier images matter. He said investigators might be able to go back and fill in who potentially could have been at Nancy's house. Fill in. Not confirm, fill in. There are people in those images investigators haven't fully identified yet. People who were at Nancy Guthrie's property before February 1st. Who were they? The FBI is building that list. And the construction site, with its crew of names now in federal hands, is part of how they're doing it. January 11th, January 24th, 2 Saturdays. Here is what the public record tells us about the weeks before February 1st, and it is more specific than most coverage has acknowledged. Investigators asked neighbors across the area to review their home security footage going back through the entire month of January. That's not unusual. But then they got more specific. They asked neighbors to check the night of January 11th specifically, a date authorities named in requests to the public. Nancy's family reinforced this in their own public statement released to KVOA in Tucson. They urged residents to search their memories around key timelines of January 31st and the early morning hours of February 1st, as well as the late evening of January 11th. January 11th, a Saturday, Nancy's neighbor Laura, who has been speaking on camera with Brian Enton since early in this investigation, confirmed to Enton that detectives examined her security camera recordings from two specific dates, January 11th and January 24th. Enton noted something that hasn't gotten nearly enough attention. Both of those dates, January 11th and January 24th, fell on Saturdays. 2 Saturdays. 3 weeks apart, 3 weeks before the abduction. Both dates, same day of the week. That is not random noise. That is a pattern. Now layer in what Fox News Digital reported. A source with knowledge of the investigation confirmed that the doorbell camera images released by the FBI were not all taken on the same night. One of the images was captured on a separate date, meaning the masked figure seen at Nancy's front door appeared there at least twice before February 1st. The Pima County Sheriff's Department pushed back, saying there was no timestamp data associated with the images that could confirm separate dates. But investigators simultaneously asked the public specifically about January 11th. Not the entire month, not a range of dates, but that night specifically. You don't make that kind of targeted public request unless you have a reason to believe something happened on January 11th. Investigators also recovered motion-triggered images from the additional cameras on Nancy's property, the pool, the backyard, the side yard, in the days before February 1st. These are not images from the night of the abduction. These are earlier. People on her property before she was taken. That is the surveillance picture. 3 confirmed touch points: January 11th, January 24th, and the night of February 1st. Each progressively closer to the door. Each visit building knowledge. Each visit confirming details the next visit would use. 30-minute mark, the ransom note reveal, and then there's the ransom note. Or more precisely, there's what was in it. When the first ransom demand reached media outlets in the days after Nancy's disappearance, TMZ's Harvey Levin made a point of flagging something specific. The note, he said, contained details that went beyond a general demand for money. At the bottom of the message, details about what Nancy was wearing the night she disappeared, about damage to her home, about the location of her Apple Watch. KOLD anchor Mary Coleman, who viewed the first ransom note her station received, described it this way.
At what point did you all realize, wow, this, might not be a crank. This might be something.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it also included a dollar amount, a deadline, and again, other specifics that only Guthrie's abductor might know. So that definitely raised some red flags. And
it contained a dollar amount, a deadline, and other specifics that only Guthrie's abductor might know. She added,
I think a lot of people were questioning the legitimacy of it. And while they're still looking into the legitimacy of it, they're taking all tips into consideration. We do know there are a few things that we can share as far as what the contents were. A lot of it is information that only someone who is holding her for ransom would know.
A lot of it is information that only someone who is holding her for ransom would know. Harvey Levin elaborated.
Something in that letter that caught my eye at the end where they mention both, now I can say it because the FBI said it, an Apple Watch and a damaged floodlight. What I found interesting, because we knew she wore an Apple Watch, there are pictures of her with Savannah with that watch, but they mentioned where the watch was, the placement of the watch in the house, and that's not something that was out there.
The letter specified where the Apple Watch was located, not in a place that you would necessarily immediately think. And that detail was what piqued the FBI's interest. What she was wearing that night, the Apple Watch, a floodlight, the condition of her home, all of it included to prove authenticity. All of it consistent with someone who had specific insider-level knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's home and her person on the night she disappeared. This is the piece that keeps tying back to the same question. How does someone know what an 84-year-old woman is wearing in her own home late at night on a Friday? How does someone know where her Apple Watch is sitting, not in the obvious place, in a way that is notable enough for the FBI to specifically take interest in? You know those things because you've been close, because you've had access, because the relationship between the person who took Nancy Guthrie and Nancy Guthrie's world goes beyond what you can see from the sidewalk. A staging location provides more than physical cover. It provides proximity long enough to learn things. The camera, the shrubbery, the window. Let's talk about what the suspect did at Nancy's front door on the night of February 1st. Because every action he took that night is a data point about what he already knew. The FBI released doorbell camera footage showing a masked individual, Ahmed, wearing a ski mask, long pants, jacket, and gloves with an Ozark Trail backpack. Approaching Nancy Guthrie's front door, the person first attempts to cover the camera lens with a gloved hand, then steps back, looks down, and picks up a piece of shrubbery from the yard to hold in front of the lens. CNN's Josh Campbell, a former FBI agent, was direct in his analysis. The individual's attempt to block the camera with material from the yard raises questions about his sophistication and any pre-planning. Because here's the thing, someone who scouted that property, who spent time learning that camera's position, angle, and coverage, would have arrived prepared to block it. They would have brought tape, a cloth, spray paint, something. Former FBI agent Steve Moore put it even more bluntly. He said he believes 100% that whoever stood at that door knew that Nancy Guthrie was on the other side of it when they were trying to cover up the camera. They were not guessing. They were not doing a random door-to-door check. They knew. Now add the timeline. Nancy's doorbell camera disconnected at 1:47 a.m. on February 1st. At 2:12 a.m., 25 minutes later, one of the side cameras registered a person, but the device did not record footage. The event was registered. The footage does not exist. 25 minutes between a camera going dark and a motion event that leaves no record. In that same window, multiple neighbors reported their security camera footage from that night as marked not available. An internet disruption in the area around the time of Nancy's disappearance was reported by NBC's Today Show and investigated by law enforcement. Investigators subsequently examined a damaged utility box located around the corner from Nancy's home. The Pima County Sheriff's Department later told Newsweek that investigators determined the utility box is not connected to the case. That specific avenue was closed. But the cameras going dark, the not available footage, the 25-minute gap that remains part of the record. What we know is this. The suspect arrived in a window where the primary recording device went offline. Whether that was planned, exploited, or coincidence is something investigators have not publicly resolved. But the knowledge this person displayed about the camera position, about the foliage that would be available on the ground, about the timing, is not consistent with a first visit to that property. Steve Moore and the targeted crime. When Brian Enton went back into Nancy's neighborhood this week and reported what the FBI was asking, specifically that agents had requested the complete names of every contractor and construction worker at a neighbor's house currently under renovation, Steve Moore was his guest. And Moore did something important. He reframed what the FBI's activity means. The instinctive read, the one the neighbor who texted Enton expressed, was frustration. The FBI was asking for construction workers, and it led that neighbor to conclude they are no further along than day 2. Moore pushed back on that directly. He told Enton that federal agents going back to a neighborhood 6 weeks in and asking for names doesn't mean they're lost. It means they have a theory, a specific theory about how this crime was committed, and they are now testing the edges of that theory against real people. The theory is this, and Moore said it clearly.
The theory of the crime informs every other bit of investigation you do. And from the beginning, the theory of the crime has been that this was targeted, that this wasn't a random thing where somebody...
This crime was targeted, not random. Not opportunistic. From the very beginning of the investigation, the working framework has been that whoever took Nancy Guthrie came to that house knowing Nancy Guthrie was inside, knowing her specifically, choosing her specifically. And Sheriff Nanos has said as much publicly, telling NBC News, "We believe we know why he did this, and we believe it was targeted." So if the crime was targeted, if someone specifically chose Nancy, then whoever did this had a way of knowing Nancy. A path, a point of contact. Moore framed it this way. The investigators are not looking at construction workers as suspects. They're looking at construction workers as a data set. A list of people who had legitimate presence in that neighborhood in the weeks before February 1st. People who might have come into contact with Nancy at the mailbox, at the end of the driveway, at the gate. Moore also offered an important piece of context about Nancy herself.
How ambulatory was she? How traveling was she? She had a car, but she didn't go to church at her local church. She Zoomed it with her, or she followed their online services for a church in New York that Savannah went to. So that leads me to believe that she didn't get out of the house as much. So then that complicates things because she doesn't come into contact with that many people.
She was not frequently out in the world. She did not attend a local church in person. She followed services online for a New York congregation affiliated with Savannah. Her neighbors told Enton she had been part of a walking group in the neighborhood years ago, but her health had limited that, which means the universe of people who could have had meaningful contact with Nancy Guthrie, who could have met her, observed her, gained access to information about her home, is relatively small. The FBI is working through that universe methodically, and the construction workers are part of it. The FBI is asking who lived next door. Here is what the FBI is doing right now in Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood. They are asking about a neighbor who moved out shortly before February 1st. They are walking a construction site on the corner and interviewing workers by name. They are going back to neighbors who already spoke to them weeks ago, asking if they have remembered anything new. They are retracing steps, and they are doing all of this because of a theory that has not changed since day one. This was targeted, which means the answer, wherever it lives somewhere in the relationship between whoever took Nancy Guthrie and this neighborhood. This specific neighborhood, these specific streets. Bob Krigier's staging location framework is not a theory invented for this video. It is the professional assessment of a man who spent 3 decades running operations that required exactly this kind of thinking. A nearby vacant property provides cover. It provides a cover story. It provides the ability to move through a neighborhood at any hour without triggering the attention of people who know exactly who belongs. And it provides something harder to quantify: time. Time to watch, time to learn, time to know what someone is wearing in their own home at midnight, time to know where the Apple Watch is sitting, time to know which piece of shrubbery is within arm's reach of the camera. That is not knowledge gathered in a drive-by. That is knowledge built over visits, over weeks, over 2 Saturdays in January.